Every Minecraft world begins the same way. Punch a tree, craft a pickaxe, and survive the night. But this world is different. You see, here I want to start at the very beginning, when humans had nothing but courage, curiosity, and fire. This is Minecraft, the rise of civilization. This world will progress in eras, which just means periods of human history. We start in the Caveman era, with no houses, no farms, just surviving. Each era has a set list of resources we can use, along with a few builds that we're trying to accomplish before moving on. We can't skip ahead, and nothing ever gets reset. Everything will stay as history. So without any further ado, this is where humanity begins. Alright, y'all, we are finally here in the Caveman era, and I am super excited to get started. Basically, the only materials we can use while we're here, though, are logs, dirt, and cobblestone. And we can only use wooden tools right now, since we aren't in the Stone Age yet. Of course, the only way to advance past the era is by creating some builds. So I think my checklist for the Caveman era is discovering fire, creating some sort of temporary camp, and then also building an ancient monument that we can look back on in the future. But for right now, I'm going to start collecting some logs and killing some pigs, since our only food source is from hunting and gathering at this stage. And most importantly, I need to find a cave for the night in order to survive. I'm not trying to take any chances with my survival this early in the game, so I decided it would be best to head off. I wanted to take this montage to talk about exactly what I want for this world. Ideally, it'll become my forever world. I think the idea of the eras not only gives me tons of themes to build around, but it also gives me a story to tell. And once I can start to develop some lore, I'm really looking forward to seeing what builds I can form around it, and also seeing what kind of history I can create. That said, I do want it to pretty closely emulate human history, with eras like the Stone Age, medieval times, the Renaissance, and more. But being able to fully control how quickly the world progresses and how the story unfolds is going to make for a huge forever world with a ton of potential. However, as cool as that sounds, it all starts with night 1, and luckily after about 5 minutes of looking, I found myself a cave. Unfortunately, since we aren't allowed beds or any modern amenities, pretty much the only thing I can do tonight is block off the entrances and exits and stick it out. But I mean, hey, we did find our very first cave on this world, which is kind of the first major milestone that we've made. Of course, there are many more to come, but just the simple act of finding a cave is the difference between being alive or dead tonight. As well, I did also see some fire out front, so I do think there's a lava pool right there, as well as a village, which we unfortunately can't explore. But with our first shelter established, I decided to call it a night. It is officially day 2 in the Caveman era, and today I wanted to work a lot more on the area around me. First things first, I wanted to make a pathway up to the cave. Unfortunately, at this time, we do have to work with a pretty limited block palette, but by caveman standards, I think it turned out pretty good. Here is the final result, and immediately after, I decided it was time to also start cutting down some trees in this area. I do think I will be spending some time here since there is some water nearby, and of course we do have our cave, so I got to work flattening some land and taking down some trees. Cutting down those trees did in fact take forever, so I decided it was finally time to craft our very first set of primitive tools. Immediately, of course, I went for a wooden axe, which I felt was pretty fitting for cutting down trees, and then I also attempted to craft Mojang's newest spear, which took me a second, but I am pretty excited about it. This is the first time I've used the spear in a survival world, and I'm looking forward to using it in this world specifically as it progresses. But after that, I decided to continue chopping down trees with our brand new wooden tools. Forcing myself to play this slow has already been a pretty interesting experience, to say the least. Usually by now I would have, stone, iron tools and things like that, but forcing myself to use Minecraft's wooden tools, which I rarely do, is actually kind of refreshing. It feels like I'm almost playing correctly. Not that there is like a correct way to play, but if you feel so inclined, I would recommend trying this out on your own survival world. But either way, as I was wrapping up chopping down trees, I spotted something that would change this world forever. We found coal, and it's right next to our cave, which is super dope. And this means that we can finally build our first fire. So without wasting any time, I headed up, crafted our very first wooden pickaxe, and headed over to mine the coal. Also, just to clarify, for this entire recording session, my game audio was completely bugged, so you don't get to listen to that experience sound. But either way, we ended up with 21 coal, and I headed over to make our first major advancement in the world. So just like that, after 2 days in the caveman era, we officially made humanity's first major advancement. Ladies and gentlemen, we have officially discovered fire. So with our first major milestone of the caveman era complete, we are now officially ready to move on from year 1 to year 30. And by the way, if you're wondering what these years mean, all they're there for is to kind of keep track of our progress throughout the world. They're not supposed to match human history or anything remotely close to it. They're simply there just to keep track of records. Like, for example, we made fire in year 1, and in the year 5000 we might go to space. Who knows, but either way, we were finally able to cook meat on our campfire, which is so great for our survival. But now with all these new and shiny advancements, it was time to refer back to our checklist, cross off discovering fire, and start working on our temporary camp. What I'm picturing for this build is more of like a campfire when you're out camping. I want a campfire in the center, I want some greenery around it, and some primitive paths and seats to kind of show, cavemen sitting around the fire and staying warm through the night. It'll also hopefully be a great waypoint for when I'm out exploring without coordinates and need to get back to the cave so I don't die. But before any of that can happen, I did start to notice that I was gonna need a bit more food if I was gonna stay around camp and be building. So I decided to test out my brand new spear and head down to start fishing. So having never tested the spear, I came to realize that unfortunately it does not do a significant amount of damage to fish. However, I did feel that spear fishing was very era appropriate in this sense, so I stuck it out, and as it started to get late, I decided to head back with all of my 3 total fish that I was able to catch. On the way back in, I did also notice some firefly bushes, which I quickly picked up because I think those would look amazing around the campfire that we're working on. As well, I took an extra second to check out the lava pool because I think it'll look awesome for that monument we want to build. Maybe it'll be some sort of caveman thought it was placed there by the gods, who knows. I want to build something similar to that though, but either way, I picked up our freshly cooked pork chop and decided to call it a night. We woke up to a beautiful sunrise on day 3 of the caveman era, but today I really just wanted to get some work done around the base. Our next objective is a temporary camp, so immediately I got to terraforming the surroundings of the cave to try and make it a bit more walkable and a bit more kind of just cohesive with the area. Also, this hill on the left had been bothering me the entire time I'd been running around on this world, so I decided it was finally time for it to go, which I thought looked a lot better. And then, ignore that, I decided to continue working on the campfire and start adding some primitive paths. Unfortunately, the block palette is pretty limited, but I thought it turned out pretty good. I tried to incorporate some rocky textures with some slabs and stairs, but unfortunately there's only so much I can do with literally just cobblestone. Afterwards, I began to patch up some more of the ravine as well as work on the path up to the cave. I wanted it to really closely match the campfire, and I think that also turned out pretty solid and made the whole area feel a bit more cohesive. And finally, I began to start a path down to the lava pool, but the sun was setting, so I had to call it a night. We started off the next day with another beautiful sunrise, but we all know that we had some unfinished pathing to do from yesterday, so I got straight to work finishing that up. I wanted to emphasize this pathway down to the lava pool because I do think this will be where we build one of our first monuments that we're going to do before we move on from the caveman era. With those builds complete though, I do feel like this does qualify as a temporary camp. We have our shelter, we have our campfires, and we have our temporary paths. So overall, I think it is time to cross it off the checklist. With the temporary camp done, it is officially time to move on to year 90 and begin working on our ancient monument. For this build, I was really inspired by Stonehenge and its use of megaliths, which are the rock formations where there's two boulders on the side and one on top. To me, it felt a bit like a gate or something kind of, I don't know, mythical like that. And so I wanted to incorporate those as well as the sundial functionality of Stonehenge, which, if you didn't know, Stonehenge also is a perfectly functioning solar calendar and sundial. So to incorporate both of those, I had to gather a ton of cobblestone to build my rocks. For the build location, I actually decided to go with this mountain right here that I had kind of been neglecting this whole playthrough. What I really like about it is that it runs parallel to east and west, which are the two directions that the sun rises on. So first thing I did was make a pathway up to it that looked kind of rough just to show that the cavemen had been there, and went ahead and started clearing the landscape. The next step after that was to begin working on the boulders themselves, and for these I wanted them to have a very natural look despite being cobblestone. Of course, I would be using regular stone in a perfect world, however, I don't think cavemen would have the silk touch enchantment. So I had to use cobblestone here, and with the use of slabs and stairs, I kind of started to texture it to look like a boulder that had survived thousands of years. I also couldn't make it gigantic because it had to be realistic for a caveman to build. Something you could notice in those earlier megalith pictures is that they are reasonably sized for like a few humans to move, and while it's just me in this Minecraft world, I think it looks pretty good. As well, I do really like the placement of it on top of the mountain, because what I think this will do is make it kind of a waypoint for looking back on it in future worlds. This is kind of where that whole caveman era, started and will eventually end, and so overall I'm really happy with how this build turned out. Up next, though, was the sundial that I wanted to incorporate. So for this, I was initially torn. I didn't want to make a copy paste of Stonehenge, so I decided to just go with something small here that looked like the cavemen kind of discovered shadows and time as they were building this little megalith, and decided to throw down a primitive sundial. For that, all I had to do was throw down a circle of cobblestone and some sort of pole in the middle to cast a shadow. I added some cobblestone details after, but it was finally time to look back on the build, and I'm really happy with how it turned out. I think the east and west thing works super well, and I really like how the megalith frames the sunset. After that, I thought I was done filming for the day, but all of a sudden I ran into a wandering trader. Unfortunately, they do go invisible at night, so I had to check in the next day, but after seeing them, it really inspired me to build the next monument. This was actually our caveman's first interaction with another human being, so I thought it would be perfect to build a statue to commemorate the wandering trader and the llamas. So it was back to the mines for me. I needed a lot more cobblestone for this build, so I widened this cave that I've been working on, which, again, there's finally game audio, so it's super satisfying. But regardless, we got about 2 stacks of cobblestone, and I went to work on the statue. For this one, I think that wandering trader spawning accidentally created the perfect lore. The way I see it is, remember, just the day before we created a gate to the skies on top of a mountain. Right after, we saw the wandering trader spawn on that same mountain. So, using some very foolproof logic, I decided it would make sense for the cavemen to almost worship the wandering trader, or kind of see it as, something sent there by the sun. Who knows? I'm trying to make it make sense, but either way, I wanted to build a statue to the wandering trader and its llamas. So with some inspiration from X Gold Robin on Instagram, I went ahead and started building this villager statue, which I think turned out really good, except for the fact that I forgot the eyebrows while I was up there. So here's the grand moment of realization, to which I went back up and put on some eyebrows, but like I said, overall I'm really happy with how this turned out. It was getting dark, but the next day I had to build some llamas. So it was back to the mines for me, since I had managed to use over 2 stacks of cobblestone just on that villager statue. But either way, I headed back out to start building those llamas. For these, I actually used my own design, because I came to find out after looking online that it is kind of difficult to nail the llama at a small scale, so I'm pretty happy with how they turned out. It's a pretty simple structure, but I do think it looks good, and it matches the villager statue very well. So after building the first one, of course, went ahead and built the second one, and I do think they framed this lava pool really well. Having the villager statue and the 2 llamas, I think, makes the perfect, commemoration of that wandering trader interaction. But if we refer back to our checklist, it turns out everything is actually done. We got our temporary camp built right here. We also got 3 ancient monuments done, which is way more than I planned on doing. And then of course we discovered fire. So before we move on from the caveman era, I think I'm going to take some time to finish up some paths, and then we'll take a final look at everything we got done while we were here. So for the pathing, all I did was make sure it was connected to the campfire area, but with that, it is time to go over everything we got done in the caveman era. First, of course, we got done with our awesome megalith, which I think frames the sun super well. Also finished up our sundial right there and got the temporary camp done. And last but not least, we completed our wandering trader and llama statues, which I think frame the lava pool so well. But just like that, we'd completed everything on the checklist, we've completed all of our builds, and it's officially time to move on from year 90 to year 120 and enter the Stone Age. But that is in the next video. Guys, thank you so much for watching. I really do hope you enjoyed. I worked super hard on this video and it is my first of the series. So if you did enjoy, please make sure you leave a like and subscribe, and I will see you guys next time. Peace.